Amanda Klasing of Human Rights Watch dropped by today. It was a fascinating conversation. Check it out, leave your comments, ding the bell, and subscribe to our channel. And on the line with us is Amanda Klasing. Amanda M. Klasing, the acting co-director of Women for Women's Rights at Human Rights Watch. HRW.org is the website. Amanda, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I'm glad to have you. The Trump administration, well, let's back up a little bit. What is the situation around the world right now with sexual violence, with rape as a weapon of war?
Yeah, absolutely. So for over 2 decades now, we have been documenting that rape or sexual violence has been used as a weapon of war by against women in a way to break the social fabric of communities, to increase terror, to as a form of genocide. There's many ways that this has been used as a tool to harm women and their families abroad. So there has been efforts to address sexual violence and conflict, both through making sure women and girls have access to services that they need, but also that there's accountability at the highest levels for this type of crime.
One of the biggest parts of this is not just the rape itself, which is violent and produces trauma and tears communities apart, and in traditional communities, for lack of a better word, very conservative communities, can scar a woman for life socially. But it's the impregnation part of it that, I'm not sure if you're old enough to remember, but those of us who are, back during the whole Serbian conflict, I believe it was Radovan Karadzic, the psychiatrist who was a Bosnian or a Serbian general, I forget which, and he actually had organized these rape camps where they had tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of Muslim women who were being regularly raped, repeatedly raped by Christian men, so that they would be impregnated, so that when they went back to their villages, and they didn't let them out until they were impregnated, they would be, basically they would be breaking not just the religious boundaries, but the cultural boundaries, the quote racial boundaries, all this kind of stuff. We have seen ISIS doing this when they take over communities that are not Sunni Muslim. I'm guessing there are other examples of this, and can you speak to that and what the UN, what the world community is doing to try to stop this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've spoken to women who have actually become pregnant because of sexual violence in the context of conflict, and it's heartbreaking. It really is when a woman is not able to access the services that she needs in order to terminate a pregnancy or to access safe prenatal care if she decides to continue it. There's also all sexually transmitted infections that if you receive timely care, you can actually prevent. The global community came together in 2000 and adopted a resolution at the Security Council, Resolution 1325, that addresses women, peace, and security. And the idea was to, one, raise the disparate impact that women suffer in conflict, particularly sexual violence and conflict, but also to increase the number of women that come to the table for peacekeeping, and also increase women's political participation after countries transition from conflict. There was a concerted effort to really put women on the agenda, on the peacekeeping agenda. And there have been subsequent resolutions that really have sought to identify gaps and protections that women face when it comes to conflict, in particular, how to get these women access to services, both mental health services, post-rape care, and as I said, prenatal care if they determine to continue a pregnancy.
Right. So, this is all pretty straightforward stuff. We're condemning rape as a weapon of war, and we are offering, and we are in favor of, and want to facilitate offering services, medical services, to women who have been raped as a weapon of war. And so this comes to the United States for, is ratification the correct word?
So it actually was a resolution to be voted upon at the Security Council this week. And
the Trump administration comes out and says what?
So there had been a negotiation process at the Security Council among the different member states, what the text of the resolution would say. And there was concern about mentioning sexual and reproductive health and rights. So there had been negotiations up until the last minute where the resolution would refer to previous resolutions that talked about sexual and reproductive health and rights without actually using those words. And at the last minute, the U.S. Threatened veto if there was even mention implicitly of sexual and reproductive health and rights. So that was removed completely from the resolution rather than having the whole thing die in committee, essentially. And so the U.S. government really flexed its veto muscle to make sure that their extreme vision of what women's rights look like is impressed upon a global community.
What is the genesis of this administration's antipathy to women's rights? Is this merely, craven political pandering to the megachurch preachers and the Catholic Church? Is the Catholic Church on record as taking that extreme a position, as being opposed to that, or is there something else going on here? It seems like this is just, this has become abortion, basically. This is all meta to abortion. Abortion has become the issue that these giant churches, the Franklin Grahams, the Jerry Falwell Jr.'s of the world, is that where it's coming from?
No, it's interesting because we're a global organization. We see trends globally that are really taking place. And what we've seen is that there is a real backlash to women's rights that includes a backlash to abortion, but also access to emergency contraception, other forms of family planning. And so the United States at the Security Council and at the UN have been aligning itself with countries like Russia, countries like Saudi Arabia on women's rights issues. The Holy See does have a seat at the UN, and so it has a very strong anti-choice position. But really, this is, yes, it's a trend in the United States, but it's a global trend to really reverse the progress that we've made in ensuring that women and girls have access to all the types of health care that they need.
Do you think that this is being driven by good old-fashioned misogyny, hatred of women, or is it being driven by patriarchy, by a belief that women should be the subjects of the man in their lives, their fathers or their husbands or whatever, or brothers, as in Saudi Arabia, for example, or wards of the state, for that matter, as in Saudi Arabia? I mean, or do you see as the principal push on this the religious objection to abortion?
So I think that misogyny and patriarchy, go hand in hand, and certainly some of the interpretations of how policy should reflect religious beliefs. They're all very closely related. But I think what we're seeing is that, as we have a rise in authoritarianism and a rise, kind of closing space of civil society, strong men and strong political leaders that are trying to approach human rights issues broadly in a way that is abusive to human rights. They're picking on marginalized groups, vulnerable groups that are used to being picked on. So that might be LGBT groups, it may be refugees, and it certainly includes women. So using abortion and the extreme divisions that talking about abortion can create in society is a way to marginalize women's voices in political spaces. It's also a way to minimize the women's rights defenders that are working around the world. And it creates strange bedfellows at the UN level, for sure. Specific to the Trump administration, to what extent do you have evidence or is there are there suggestions that this is growing, this is coming out of a general anti-woman antipathy on the part of the Trump administration? I mean, you've got Donald Trump, who is, kind of an admitted misogynist and sexual assaulter. He has surrounded himself largely with men, and the few women in his cabinet, people like Betsy DeVos, are more like the kind of Phyllis Schlafly women, I would say. Or is it that you think he's doing this in deference to the Franklin Grahams and Jerry Falwell Jr.'s of the world, or of the United States? the source of where the policy is coming from, I can't speak to, but what I can say is that we see from the local level to the global level, there's consistent attack on women's rights coming from the Trump administration. So you look at, there's a domestic version of a global gag rule that limits what it is service providers that use federal family planning dollars can actually say to their patients. And then you see a massive expansion of the global gag rule that includes up to $9 billion of U.S. foreign health assistance that gags what it is doctors and service providers can tell women and girls that they provide services to. And this is happening at a time that the State Department no longer is reporting on reproductive rights within their annual human rights report. And what that means is in the past we've seen reporting on preventable maternal mortality, women dying in childbirth as a human rights issue, or access to contraception as a human rights issue. That's been written completely out of the human rights reports for the last 2 years.
Wow.
So across the board, yeah, absolutely. So across the board, we're seeing this pattern of really minimizing or erasing women's rights within this foreign policy and domestic policy of this administration.